Good afternoon. I'm Ed Pozzuoli from Tripp Scott, and welcome. Today we're joined by Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, who, after 20 years of service in the United States Army, now resides in Broward County with his wife Angela and his two lovely daughters. And this past November, he was elected to the United States House of Representatives, District 22. Congressman West, welcome.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here with you.
And you know, to start, I want to say congratulations.
Thanks, Ed.
So how has it been?
Well, it's been very enlightening. I tell you, when you go up there and you serve 22 years in the military and you've gone all over the world to protect the institutions that make this republic great, and now you get the opportunity to serve in one of those institutions, and when you wake up every day and your office is in the Longworth building, you go over to the Capitol and you place your voting card in there, that's something special.
And you're now joining majority Republican House.
Absolutely. 87 new freshmen, and we have 242 members on the Republican side.
And no more challenging time than today.
Absolutely.
Florida is, as you know, with unemployment in Florida about 12%.
Yes.
How do we fix the economy?
Well, the most important thing is, you know, last week when I was sitting there listening to the State of the Union address, and you hear the president talk about investment and innovation, that's just a new connotative meaning for government spending. If we really want to turn it around economically with job growth and also long-term sustainable economic strength, it comes from the private sector. It comes from reducing the taxation burdens and the regulatory burdens we put on them. You look at something such as the corporate business tax rate, which will soon be the highest in the world at 35%. You got to cut it in half. You got to look at simplifying the individual tax code. You got to give people some certainty and predictability so that, you know, it's not this election cycle soundbite mentality that's going to get us to where we need to be in this country. We've got to have long-term visionary leadership that looks in the 20 to 30 year realm, and I think that's what we're going to do.
How do we get private business to feel confident enough to hire?
I think they have to see us in Washington, D.C. take care of business up there. I mean, you and I had a great discussion before we came here about how you imparted some austerity measures. Well, we got to do the same thing up in Washington, D.C. because it's not a revenue problem here in the United States of America, it's a spending problem. Fiscal year 2010, $3.3 trillion of government spending, and we only brought in about $2.2 trillion of revenues. So if we continue down this path of 1.42 trillion, 1.29 trillion, CBO just last week said 1.48 trillion in deficits, you know, the private sector is not going to have any confidence in us doing the right thing. So that's where we have to make that change.
And what can this Congress do to encourage both small and larger business to hire and to research and put more money into research and development for innovation? What can they do?
Well, I think that you're starting to see that already, us looking how we can cut in Washington, D.C., but trying to give some predictability, trying to say we're going to bring down those tax rates, trying to say we're going to reduce that regulatory burden. You know, I'm sitting on the Small Business Committee, and my subcommittee, one of them is Investigations, Oversight, and Regulation. So it's so important that I start listening to the small business owners down here, and people like Mike Jackson, people like yourself, people like Wayne Huizenga, that say, you know, this is what we need you to do for us up there so that we can do the things to grow. Just had a great opportunity sitting over and talking to the Fort Lauderdale Airport director. They're going to bring in that new southern runway. Right. And you think about the jobs that will create. You think about the increased revenues. I mean, $2.7 billion a year, that's what that airport brings in. Right. And when you bring it in together with the world's largest cruise port, now we're talking about how we turn around down here in South Florida.
What specifically can Congress do? And what specifically, Congressman West, can you do to breed confidence in the small business owner to hire the extra account, or hire the extra clerk, or to invest in new technologies?
I give you a great example. You know, one of the reasons why we had to extend the Bush-era tax cuts, because small businesses operate at the S Corp, the personal income tax rate. So if we all of a sudden let that personal income tax rate go for those two top brackets up 5 to 6%, you know, that's not giving them the incentive to hire people. So at least we kept them stable. But for 2 years, that really is not very beneficial as far as the business cycle. So we've got to get people to understand, let's make things like that permanent. Then you look at this health care law that we just voted to repeal. The good thing is that even the president admitted, you know, this 1099 regulation, you got to get rid of it. But when you dig through that healthcare law, where it tells small businesses you must stay under 50 employees, because if you go above 50 employees, now all of a sudden we're going to fine you even more so. How is that providing an incentive for our small businesses to grow?
Right. This week, a Florida judge set aside the Obama health care plan.
Yes.
As unconstitutional.
Yes.
Your thoughts on that?
He was spot on, because when you read the Constitution, you understand the interpretation of the Commerce Clause. The federal government is responsible for commerce between states, between foreign nations, and also the Indian tribes. It is laid out very plainly.
Right.
So when the federal government starts to get in the business of telling an individual citizen that they must enter into a private contractual agreement for a certain commodity, that's outside their boundaries and their mandates. And so Vincent was right on.
Let me switch gears. You mentioned that we don't really have a revenue problem. We have more of a spending problem. Yes. How do we reduce spending without impacting our military?
Yeah.
And do we address the entitlement programs?
We have to. As a matter of fact, one of the things I've been telling folks, we got this debt ceiling coming up. And the only way I can support raising the debt ceiling is if we put budgetary control measures in place. We've got to have a balanced budget amendment. We have got to look at capping federal spending somewhere between 18 and 20%. We have got to take the big three entitlement programs off of autopilot and come up with some different solutions in the out years. Because if not, as they are continuing right now, by 2045, they will subsume our entire GDP and we'll be a permanent borrower nation. And then the last thing, and most important, we talked about is cutting the corporate business tax rate. But when you look at our overall spending, defense budget is about 20%. But there are some inefficiencies. There's some wasteful and overhead spending that we can cut. But what we have to do, because I do sit on the Armed Services Committee, we got to reinvest that money into modernization, procurement, our installations to make sure we have good programs for our warriors and also for their families. Because as everyone has seen right now with the events going on in Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, Jordan, Lebanon, the world is a more dangerous place. As a matter of fact, I tell people it's more Machiavellian than it is Kantian. So we have really kind of put our heads in the sand. But we now have to start looking in the out years, 20, 30 years. And don't forget China. Because with the economic upper hand that China has, the trade surplus that they have developed, the world's largest blue water navy is going to fly on the Chinese flag within the next 10 years.
The debt they hold.
The debt they hold. And also, coming back to the economic impact on us here, who controls the Panama Canal right now? Right. Chinese contractors. And they're looking to expand the Panama Canal and bring in larger cargo ships. We don't want them strangling us here because that's a huge impact on our port here.
Let me switch gears on you again. You mentioned Egypt and the Middle East.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about the potential impact of the instability in the Middle East today on our closest friend there, Israel.
Well, when you look at Israel at this current time, there's a very tenuous peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. And a lot of people have to remember it was the Muslim Brotherhood that assassinated Anwar Sadat.
Right.
And then Mubarak came in. And so he has had to be very tough on that organization. But if all of a sudden the Muslim Brotherhood takes over and they have a very stated intent and purpose, not just for Israel, but also for us, then you see a collusion between the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. Then you see a collusion between the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Hezbollah. You see a collusion then with Islamic Jihad. And all of a sudden Israel is really fighting a three-front war, right. Especially if something goes south even more so in Jordan. We've got to stand with Israel. I mean, that's an economic partner. The inextricable tie that we have with the modern state of Israel cannot be broken.
And what can the White House do now?
The most important thing we have to understand, and this is where you have to be a student of history, because you go back 32 years ago, Carter, Iran, Shah, Ayatollah. You fast forward to now, Obama, Egypt, Mubarak, Muslim Brotherhood. If we continue to show weak leadership in that part of the world, they're going to take advantage of that. And never forget that it was after the civil wars in Afghanistan, there was a certain group that said they would come in and try to bring peace, stability, and civil society. The Clinton administration recognized them, and that group was called the Taliban.
And this kind of dovetails into your policy of strength, peace through strength.
That was Reagan's policy. That was what enabled us to bring the Soviet Union down. And as he said, standing there, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And those simple words resonated all across Eastern Europe. And you saw the movement in Poland and Hungary and Romania, because the human spirit wants liberty, it wants freedom. But it also needs principled and very resolute leadership to follow.
Well, it should be interesting times. We're thankful for your past
Thanks.
and your current service to our country.
Absolutely.
Congressman West, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
Appreciate it.
Uh-huh.